Welcome back to the part 2 of this Conspiratus episode. We're going to pick up exactly where we left off last time.
And to ask your opinion on another thing,
Mm-hmm.
are you similarly pro Ethereum fund recovery or no? Specifically in the parity case.
I'm pretty ambivalent on the parity case. I mean, you know my opinion on the DAO attack, the DAO recovery, right? Like I'm pretty against the DAO recovery because I thought it breaks the social consensus on what Ethereum is, the social contract on what Ethereum is and on what the DAO was.
Specifically, are we talking about the phrase "code is law"?
Hashtag code is law, as well as one other part where in the terms of agreement of the DAO, it actually also said that the DAO will be governed by the code and nothing else. So I think when people contributed to the DAO, they were agreeing to those terms.
So first of all, to push back, we both know, sure as hell, that neither of us have ever read a single goddamn terms of service in our life, no matter whether it's the DAO or not.
I think when you're interacting with a brand new type of entity like this, you probably should read the terms.
So did you?
I didn't contribute to the DAO. You did.
No, sure, but my conflicts of interest were massive. My first ever $10 Ethereum was locked up in there. I was too conflicted.
How much is that $10 of Ethereum worth now, though?
Yeah, that's fair. That's a fair point. In DAO tokens, it's worth nothing. So let's say that. I don't even know. I actually don't know if I've ever reclaimed it because back then it was worth $10, and I was like, oh, whatever. It's too much effort. And now I'm like, oh my god, I should go get that.
You can.
But
so I did an Epicenter episode with Griff Green from
cool.
Giveth, and he was like part of the DAO White Hat team and stuff. And so he actually mentioned that, like, there's even today they're still constantly giving out funds from the DAO.
Sure.
You still go claim them.
But I was going to say, so, like, I don't know about you, but even when I'm interacting with a new legal entity, like, when I sign things, most of the time, I'll be honest, I don't read them too explicitly. Mm-hmm. And I also wonder, like, at least for me, given the DAO was, in some sense, my first interactions with all this blockchain stuff, but it always seemed to me like the whole social contract was not so explicitly stated. Like, so if I asked you to characterize Bitcoin's social contract in one sentence, but I had asked you to do that in 2016, what would you have said? Like, down with the banks?
Digital gold, 21 million hard cap. That's like this very Austrian economics like approach, and that's like the vision of Bitcoin. That's what the social contract is.
Okay, fair
and
enough.
That's why. And so I actually had this argument on Twitter before, where I think that the DAO recovery broke Ethereum's social contract, which was code is law, while Bitcoin's reversion of the minting, like, how I printed like 1 billion Bitcoin or something, I think that broke Bitcoin's social contract, which made it more legitimate to reverse that.
Oh, interesting. So there's this idea of blockchain or cryptocurrency having a social contract, and hard forks, the only hard forks that are bad are the ones that explicitly kind of break the social contract that this has. So I guess, okay, I will say, in the Ethereum case, the code is law thing kind of was plastered everywhere, so it doesn't really sound great, but I bet you in the future, as these things kind of become more general use and used by a lot of people, it's going to be a lot harder to say, the Ethereum blockchain is for code is law.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
That's why now I'm much more ambivalent about the parity situation, because now I'm like, all right, well, that original social contract of Ethereum, we just threw it out the window with the DAO recovery. I'm not quite sure what the new social contract is, but, it seems that we're much more open to,
or at least
parity,
we're more
recovery like this. And I actually, I will say, yeah, exactly. And I think I'll admit, I'm actually probably leaning more towards that. Yeah, let's recover those funds, I guess. But
yeah,
if you don't want recovery, then go to Ethereum Classic, which is dope because I want more people to use Ethereum Classic.
Yeah, we'll see. So we were just talking about how, like, understanding whether or not hard forks are good in some sense for a blockchain relates to what the kind of agreed upon social contract of said blockchain is. But the one thing I would add on is that one thing that gives me pause about the parity hard fork, the parity fund recovery, is the fact that it is parity. And that's not because I hate parity. It's just that it's very clear that the amount of influence that parity has over the ecosystem is significantly more than, Jim, Joe, and Jill, who lost their funds because of reason X, Y, and Z, right? So my concern is that in some sense, by supporting this hard fork, we kind of implicitly disenfranchise these small people who don't have access to,
the social capital
power. Yeah, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, But you could think of it one way that it's the parity team, but it's also, if you want to take a much more objective viewpoint, it is the largest amount of funds that is lost in a single attack.
That's fair. No, yeah, it's certainly, it's certainly a large sum of money, and it's not only, it's like there are also other people other than the parity team who have lost funds in the attack as well.
Technically, the parity team never lost any funds. It's the Web3 team that lost funds.
My bad.
Yeah.
The overlap is undefined, at least from the outside. So excuse my confusion. But
another thing though about that, I think kind of what makes people a little bit more annoyed about it, like that contributes to the metagame, is that people are kind of annoyed that parity had a hack on that same wallet contract 4 months prior, and they said they got it fixed and audited, and then another attack happened. And I think that's it's kind of like, I don't know. I really think that
it just sucks. You got to imagine, for the people who wrote that code, it really must have just been a bad day. It was just like probably very upsetting.
Yeah, and I have to your point about like whether parity social capital is helping in this situation, I think it might actually be hurting them more than helping them. I think that there's some level of like vendetta or wanting to make parity feel the pain. Like I feel like the fact that it's parity might actually be hurting them more than it's helping them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that I like can be observed more generally in the crypto space, like a general idea of, oh, you screwed up, like get screwed, pretty much.
What do you think about this idea that it's also a in order to screw over Polkadot?
Oh, interesting. So the Ethereum community in general is not supporting the fund recovery because it screws over Polkadot by limiting their funds?
Yes.
Interesting. To be totally honest with you, I doubt it, only because it's like 2 steps of thought, and I doubt... I mean, there definitely are people thinking very deeply about the fund recovery, but it seems like the community in general is pushing back against it. And I would say for most people, they probably aren't saying, oh, Web3, oh, it's parity, Web3, okay, we're stopping Polkadot.
Were you following along with the whole Afri drama and stuff?
Not super closely. So yeah, I would say that in general, the like conflict of interest discussion and the conversation around Afri and all that stuff, and like essentially the relationship between Ethereum and parity that's come to the forefront through Web3 and like all of these things is like, it's worrying a little bit. It's worrying. It doesn't seem great for the culture of either systems.
Yeah.
In it. Yeah.
I mean, so this is, I kind of, have been saying this for a long time. I never had anything against Afri. I actually didn't know him. And I met him actually. We judged together at ETH Paris, which was cool. He was a cool guy. I enjoyed hanging out with him. But in general, for a while, I've been kind of like pushing this idea that, look, if I'm going to take the cynical viewpoint here, right? If Polkadot and Ethereum 2.0 are like direct competitors, right? Then, Parity is also the largest, one of the main developers of Ethereum, and from their viewpoint, it's in their interest to grind their feet and grind Ethereum 2.0 development to a halt in order to make sure Polkadot launches first. And I think the Ethereum community realized this, and that's why now there's so many new clients being developed for ETH 2.0 to get rid of the control that any single client developer has over the roadmap of the Ethereum project.
So, quick thought.
Yes.
I will say that is quite a cynical view. In some sense, I think parity has demonstrated multiple times that it really is a valuable asset to the Ethereum community.
I agree. Yeah.
I mean, it's their client's great. Rust is cool. I mean, it's great. But at the same time,
I personally run parity, by the way.
Cool, nice. You're real conflicted now. I don't know if we can trust you, but yeah. So it's not. I see where you're coming from. I would imagine that probably, if it is a thing at all, it's probably not an explicit thing, but rather, the developers are focusing more on Polkadot than they would be on the Ethereum.
I mean, it might be a subconscious thing. I mean, also I know the way parity is structured, the teams that are developing Polkadot is completely separate than the teams that's developing parity Ethereum.
Fair enough then. Yeah, fair enough. But I will say, here's a question for you. is more clients necessarily, does that necessarily mean that like this whole like one client having power over the roadmap, does that mean that disappears? Because in some sense, the way we see the core dev calls kind of come out today, the way these things, when I watch them, how I see them expressed is it's very much like a, if someone says no, then everyone kind of hesitates and it gets pushed back down the line, right? So it might be the case that more clients might lead to more people having the ability to kind of say no to the roadmap or kind of slow things down, at least if that's what we're talking about.
So you're saying it has like 100% fault tolerance or 0% fault tolerance?
0% fault tolerance in some sense, yeah. Because it seems like as of now, because there aren't very formal structures, anyone giving a serious amount of pushback can essentially, kick something to the next hard fork, at least in the case of like Ethereum 1 upgrades. And in that case, if we have 10 clients, and 10 different people have the ability to kind of kick the bucket down the road, which might not be great.
Okay. I see. That's an interesting viewpoint. Yeah. I mean, so, I've asked this question to Justin Drake, and he gave me an answer. I don't know if he wants that answer to be public or not, but the question I asked was, how many clients have to be ready in order to...
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, out of these 10 client implementations for like phase 0 of ETH 2.0, how many need to be ready for us to activate ETH 2.0 phase 0?
Yeah. That's really interesting. I imagine what they'll do is we'll set a date for launch and say to the client people, like, you better get ready, hurry up. And hopefully it'll be a conservative number, but
what if only one client is ready by then?
Yeah. I mean, we would probably. I imagine that the community would probably agree to delay it in that case. But okay. that would be a I would say non-auspicious launch of the ETH 2.0 chain. Yeah. So in this conversation about Parity's relationship to Ethereum and this pushback against moderators and in some sense against Afri, people, core developers of Ethereum clearly are open and willing to speak out against the problems of Ethereum. I think in a way that you don't see with a lot of other blockchain projects. Like, personally, I've never seen a Tron developer saying, "Oh, here's why Tron sucks." And I was wondering what you think about like, core developers speaking out negatively against the project they work on.
Well,
and the community they work with, I guess we should say, because it's not like Afri was like, "Oh, the Ethereum project specifically sucks." It was more so the community has caused me to want to take some time.
Yes. But keep in mind, that was triggered by him saying that Polkadot will be better than ETH 2.0, or Polkadot does everything ETH 2.0 is meant to, or something like that.
Fair enough.
And to your point that it's okay for Ethereum developers to say that, I mean, I don't know, Afri was kind of pushed out of the community for doing that. It seems Lane is also kind of being pushed out as well for similar reasons. I know or
at least facing resistance, let's say.
Facing high amounts of, resistance. And I think part of the issue with Afri's was that, like, he kind of just, like, kind of, I don't know, maybe was trying to be a little bit edgy there and kind of just, like, said that outright. At least with Lane, I, like, actually, I really like the threads that he wrote that kind of, like, garnered a lot of controversy. And people are like, oh, he called himself the Buddha. But, like, no, if you read the tweet, it's more specific. It's not quite like that. It was more nuanced than himself calling himself the Buddha. But yeah, so I don't know. I mean, there is some resistance to that in the Ethereum community as well. That being said, I think you're right. I think the Ethereum community definitely does make it easier for people. We definitely do see more conflicting opinions out in the public than you would maybe see on other projects.
In some sense, I think it's really valuable, right, for core developers to be able to express their opinions, because personally, whenever I talk to core developers of a project, they tell me, 10 new things that I've never heard before. They're like, oh, this sucks for reason X, Y, and Z. I actually wrote the code. Here's why it's horrible, right?
Yeah.
And so it's quite valuable to hear those opinions, but at the same time, it's, at least from watching them speak publicly on Twitter, it's not so clear that type of expression leads to positive public discourse. I'm not sure if Lane claiming, Ethereum governance is broken actually in any way improves Ethereum governance, right?
Sure.
So it might be the case that if these things are better suited for different channels than they're currently being expressed on.
That's why this podcast is cool, right? Because I just spent the first 20 minutes just talking about some of my distractions of how the Cosmos hard fork went, which, it would have been really hard for me to express that. I mean, I tried to express it over Telegram and stuff and some of the channels there, but I think this was way better than me expressing it over Twitter.
Totally, yeah. No, 280 characters, I should say, is not, it's not a ton of space. Even with a thread, it's not best for consumption.
Exactly, yeah. How do people actually, honestly, 280 characters is like, it feels so normal now. I don't remember how any of us got by in the 140 character days.
Dude, only abbreviations. Never have a full word in your tweet. Actually, I gotta tweet more. You've cultivated a real Twitter following over the last year. I've watched you blossom from a young lad on Twitter to a real following. I'm jealous.
I've been trying to like tone down the crypto Twitter lately, and I've been doing a lot more just like geography Twitter, I guess.
Geography facts. Which the question is, where are you getting them? And the answer is, there's definitely one list you're pulling from online. And like realistically, if you tweeted that, we'd all be better off.
No, it's mostly a combination of Reddit. There's this one. You're right. There's this one Reddit thread that has like a bunch of YouTube channels. I have this like post on my personal blog that has like a list of really cool YouTube channels, and then I was also in my high school's geography club, so kind of just know a few things from
Very
that.
Cool.
Dude,
Can I ask what a geography club in high school does?
we participate in geography bees.
That's actually sick. I was imagining people just looking at a map and going, "Oh, look at that! That's a place."
There's a little bit of that, but yeah, it was fun. It was a fun club. Yeah. So back to what we were talking about control over Ethereum. Someone pointed out this interesting thing to me a couple of months ago, I guess, at ETHCC, where we were talking about like how much control the Ethereum Foundation has over like their control of the trademark and whatnot, which I think is pretty high.
Seemingly not so enforced, though.
Yes, that's correct. But given that, what the guy pointed out to me was, you know who really has a lot of control over Ethereum is Rune Christensen and his buddies. Basically, or I don't know how much buddies there are right now. Like if you read.
Sorry,
through,
and
like,
to clarify, Rune Christensen is Maker.
Yes.
Man.
Yes, the founder of MakerDAO, and the reason I don't know if you've read all of the drama that's going on inside of MakerDAO right now, so I don't know how close he is with his buddies per se, but the MakerDAO community in general. And so the reason is, if you buy this narrative that ETH's main use case right now is this whole DeFi stuff, right? And DAI is sort of like the centerpiece of of this whole thing, right? Like if you look at the largest trading pair on Uniswap is DAI to ETH right now. If I think the most commonly used thing in Compound is DAI, and so DAI is sort of the centerpiece of this. And let's say there's a contentious fork, right, on Ethereum. Let's say it's Parity decides to hard fork and say we want our funds back that bad. By the way, this was actually a legitimate proposal back at one point. Actually, at the time, during ETHCC, and so it was like, okay, let's say there's this fork, and who gets to decide? What if the Maker holders decide to stop running the price oracle on one of the chains?
So they essentially have a scorched earth policy. They burn their DApp on one chain.
Yes.
Wow, that's a dark vision of the future. So here's the claim, pretty much. Any DApp that has two things: sufficient influence in general in the community, aka it's used in a lot of other protocols. So another example might be an identity protocol or something, an identity DAO or something.
Mm-hmm.
So sufficient influence and also control. Like people who are in control there can essentially dictate hard forks by burning the hell out of their dApps on one chain.
And part of the issue with this is the fact that, here's one of the things. People are always so excited about DAI. You know what I don't understand? How the hell is MKR distributed? No one has given me, like, a good, solid answer of, like, how that thing was distributed.
Initially?
Yeah, who owns it? Like, it's like the Maker Foundation and a couple of VCs. Like, why are people so, like, putting so much money on this thing? It's like
I actually did not know that. I actually thought they had a token sale. I did not know that.
There was never a token sale.
Oh wow, that's crazy. Is it traded anywhere? Like I'm assuming it's traded on decentralized exchanges, but is it traded anywhere? Do you know?
I don't know.
Interesting. Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, and I would say that's makes the whole situation even more concerning. Like
I imagine it has to be traded on centralized exchanges because I know it's pretty high up on CoinMarketCap.
Fair enough. Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess though I will say the fact that it wasn't initially distributed using some, let's say, more open mechanism than the thing you've presented makes the whole control over Ethereum hard forks concerning. So
Yeah.
here's a question for you.
And I'm pretty sure the Maker Foundation still controls the vast majority.
Well, do you know? It doesn't seem like it's possible to build a smart contract platform that doesn't give smart contracts this ability, though. You know what I mean? Like in any case, so let me rephrase that. There are certain smart contracts where no one can do anything to scorch the earth, right? Like, I can't think of it. A good example might be something where, like, an escrow. There's nothing you can do to ruin an escrow. Like, it's locked up, it's going to pay out in 6 months, whatever. There's nothing you can do to burn it. But in any smart contract where there necessarily is some way to scorch the earth, it seems like if these things get big, they're going to be able to control the future of these chains.
You know why I'm smiling?
Why?
I mean, there is a certain, I think, design pattern for the blockchain ecosystem that I think helps get around this problem.
Oh, no.
You
It's
know
not
what
multiple chains, is it?
Yeah,
I didn't dig myself into a hole, did I?
Multiple chains that all connect to each other, and every application is on its own little chain, and so only that community has control over that chain, but not over this large empire ecosystem. Cosmos.
So, just to really hammer it in there in case everyone didn't get it. So let's see. Let's walk through this. So on the Cosmos thing, let's imagine. Well, so what would be the equivalent of a hard fork that they get to determine control over? Oh shit! So I guess.
So my point is that Maker. So let's say MakerDAO was on its own chain, right?
Yes.
And this other chain is splitting because of some conflict that's happening in its own little world, right?
Yeah.
The MakerDAO chain doesn't have any excess influence over which of these chains happens, and because IBC is permissionless, the DAI that MakerDAO is in charge of still can flow into both these chains equivalently.
So this I will push back against. This is where I see it not necessarily being the case. Imagine, for example, that a Cosmos hub forks. Okay.
Yeah.
And Maker says we're going to go with one and this doesn't actually work. So I guess my question is, would there be a way to essentially for Maker to blacklist which IBC these things go to?
No, because once, let's say, Maker sends some. So let's say Maker only goes to one hub, but then someone can set up a connection from that hub to the other hub now. The idea is IBC should be permissionless.
Should be.
So even if one chain is blocking IBC connections to another chain, if you can get around it by going to through another chain, right? It's adding an extra layer like trust in that connector chain. But yes, you can bypass that chain still. It's kind of like how it's like doing stuff on a second layer network because then that you can't. You see what I mean?
Yeah, you can't stop it necessarily on the first layer. It's hard to blacklist because there are sneaky ways around it. Okay. Fair point. Fair point. I hear you. I'm not totally convinced that it's impossible to.
I'm not saying it's impossible. All I'm saying is that it segments governance issues to the communities that it directly affects and minimizes or helps minimize the control that non-relevant parties have over the direction
of your DApp.
Yes.
Fair. So here is the trade-off that you are presenting that I guess I have never really thought about the different chain thing. I've always thought of the ability of a single app to essentially fork itself without any effect on anybody else as being bad in many cases, because you could imagine, like, if Maker people were nefarious in general, they could burn everything, and that would ruin the whole Maker ecosystem as it spreads to other chains, right? And that's not necessarily possible on Ethereum in the same way. You could obviously, those people could vote to ruin it, but they couldn't hard fork to ruin it in the same way. But at the same time, the thing that this enables is the thing that this stops is people or dApps from getting undue influence over the entire governance process as a whole and controlling essentially the future of the blockchain itself. Yeah, it's a very fair point. I've actually never thought of that. That's super interesting. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Is that something that you have thought of explicitly before, or is that something that you realized through this conversation?
No, this has always been the main premise of Cosmos, right? Like,
interesting.
I've been saying this for a while, right? Like, Ethereum is an empire, and Cosmos is a world of nation states. In the Roman Empire, the people in the Roman Empire, it was the people of the Italian peninsula who are considered Roman citizens, and everyone else is considered Roman subjects, right? And the people of the Italian peninsula have undue control over the ongoing of the entire empire. Cosmos is a world of nation states where it says, no, let's not have these empires which have try to push everyone into this common political framework, right? Let's allow different sovereign entities to have their own governance and control over their own future, but still allow that economic connectivity. This has always been. I think Cosmos. It's always been somewhat. The difference between Cosmos and Ethereum both work on scalability, whether it's the sharding or. I think the main difference here is Cosmos is, I think, primarily a governance based. It's supposed to be affixed to the governance issues of the blockchain ecosystem that we saw in Ethereum. So you know how in the Bitcoin Genesis block, Satoshi put the headline from the Times that day, which was Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. In the Cosmos Genesis SICA, we put in our Genesis transaction, which bonds us as a validator, we put the Times headline from that day, which is Brexit vote must be put on hold. MPs warn May. And, And so it was really cool. It's just we were so happy that it's what a perfect thing for that day, because we saw it as Bitcoin is this revolution in finance and monetary policy, and to us Cosmos really is supposed to be this opening up a new paradigm for how governance is done.
So real quick, I want to push back a bit, because this argument you made about stopping certain dApps from having undue influence over the empire, let's say, is one thing. Mm-hmm. And the multi-chain model seems to solve that in some sense. Obviously, it needs more explanation, but as a first glance, it seems to solve that in many ways. But that doesn't necessarily mean that governance needs to be solved in terms of this kind of very formalized voting power, the top 100 validators, or validators decide everything. So it's not at all clear that those two things are tied together, or really should be.
Yeah.
So I hear your first point. I'll push back on the second.
So of course. So Cosmos as a vision is somewhat distinct from the Cosmos Hub as a vision, right? The Cosmos project is just saying, many chains that are connected to each other, there can be many different hubs, and the Cosmos Hub is just one hub that is competing in this thing, and it's providing a specific service and a specific philosophy that maybe people like and choose to go along with, or maybe they don't. And if not, they can go to a different hub in the ecosystem. And there are already multiple hubs in the Cosmos ecosystem. So you can buy into this multi-chain system, but you don't necessarily have to buy into the fact that, governance needs to be done by stakeholder voting or whatnot.
Fair enough. Cool. Well, I'm going to spend the next period of time before our next podcast thinking more deeply about influence dApps have over the hard forking process and how the multi-chain architecture changes that. But that's a really interesting point. So thanks.
Cool. Yeah. So, I think we're pushing up on quite a bit of time now.
Sure.
Anything you want to end with?
Thanks to all our dedicated listeners. We're really sticking through thick and thin, usually thin apparently, with the podcast coverage, but we're getting back into it, and we're, as you can tell, we're having a ton of fun. So
cool.
Cheers.
All right. See you. Bye.
Peace out.